Or is your bias against, more of a, is your bias and prejudice more a species level thing? Okay. Secretariat might be the most, the greatest sports figure of all time. A Secretariat says, I dominated and I did it all with this little sadist on my back. But, maybe the greatest, certainly, Secretariat might be the greatest athlete. But I think really, it's going to be, for me at least, there are people who dominated in their sports, like Joe Louis, Jackie Robinson, and Jesse Owens. But it wasn't just about the competitiveness or about the aesthetics. There was also a political dimension, which, we really need to consider. In this case, it was Jesse Owens traveling to Nazi Germany in 1936 and taking on a bunch of white athletes, including some of them Germans, and demonstrating that the theories of this racial superiority was all a bunch of hogwash. Not a single one of you fought against Hitler in theories of racial superiority. So, this is just sort of a progression that seeks to sort of uncover some of our perhaps, our innate biases when it comes to sports. And that's what this class is going to do, is we're going to look at a lot of different types of sports and try to figure out, try to be cast the net as widely as possible. So here's the next one. Next exercise? What were the most important moments in sports during the 2020 calendar year? To come up with that list, you need to know what your criteria are for judgment. Are they aesthetic, political, or personal? Okay. And how or why could these moments change in their relevance over time? Maybe something's really relevant now, but it might not be so. It's almost like, you ever seen like, ooh, that won an Academy Award? That bad film from 20 years ago? Well, people liked it at the time, but it hasn't aged well. So here are my three choices. Number one, I think, is the explosion of social protest that's really been going on since 2016, but kind of in limited format. And 2020, it comes back with a vengeance, based on George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and a lot of a greater awareness of what Black Americans knew all along and other minorities knew all along when it came to inequity in the American justice system. Okay, with police and in courts, and in a lot of different areas of life. So Colin Kaepernick is gone but not forgotten. He continues to be a hero for some and a villain for others. I think that we're going to look back on him as sort of this generation's John Carlos. John Carlos and Tommy Smith got death threats, and now we look back on that as one of the most courageous acts of the 20th century. I think we're going to do the same with Colin Kaepernick as well. And I really think that he was ahead of his time, because 4 years later, we're seeing it with not just Black athletes, but numerous athletes from all different backgrounds, and not just in football, in all different sports, protesting racial inequity. And then number two would be COVID, as one headline said, home 2, visitor 1, spectator 0. COVID-19 empties the stands and really may bring some changes to the sports that we know and love. We may get on the far side of this thing, and there will be some changes that can be directly attributed to COVID. And then I just put this kind of like preachy quote on here that basically says that, a moment in sports, the significance of which approaches the level of COVID-19 disruption or ongoing anthem protests against police violence has yet to present itself to me. However, if history suggests anything, it will be that this third moment will occur off the field and will involve aspects of race, gender, class, health, and or sexuality, notable more for its overtly political dimensions than its aesthetic features. Those are the aspects of sports that are designed to last in the years and decades that follow. And then, you can Google Scottish caber toss and watch the kind of the video, but is something a sport, a game, or a competition? And I think competition is just something like, hey, let's do slap hands. We do this, and I was always really good at slap hands. That's like the only athletic thing I excelled at. I was in the chess club. I played poker, but slap hands is the only thing that I'm good at. Not a sport. Okay. I I'm not even sure it's really a game. It's just a competition. Games are a little bit more involved, and sports. So how do we define what is a sport? Okay, I think most of us would say football, basketball, and hockey is a sport. I think all of us would say that. I think boxing, horse racing, and NASCAR. Yeah, I like to make fun of the South too. I was born in Arkansas, so it's okay for me to do that. But I like to say, well, in California, we know how to drive not just in left-hand circles, but we can also drive in right-hand circles if we need to. But NASCAR is a sport, and the one time I went to NASCAR, I actually found myself really wrapped up in it. It's kind of fascinating, actually. I mean, there's a lot that goes planning that goes into it, and it's a pretty astonishing sport. We'll talk more about that when we get to the week of NASCAR. But these are all clearly sports. Tennis, golf. What about ping pong? Well, this is where I start to say we need to think a little bit more broadly. Ping pong is probably a game in the United States, but it is most definitely a sport in China. So there might be some cultures. Ping pong is very serious in China. It's one of their primary. They have leagues. They have multiple leagues. People can make a lot of money playing ping pong, but you probably wouldn't call it a sport in the United States. You might, but you also might just call it a game. Diving, figure skating, ballroom dancing. We start to get a little bit more nervous because these are sports where the judges play a much larger role. You win or lose solely on judges' scores. And I think, so diving's in the Olympics, so we're going to call it a sport. Figure skating in the Olympics is making me feel a little bit less likely to call it a sport because it's dancing, but it's dancing on ice. It's in the Olympics, it's okay. But no, I'm going to put my foot down for ballroom dancing. Ballroom dancing has been competed in the Olympics. Okay, so ballroom dancing, some people do consider it a sport. Now we're starting to get to where a lot of people are going to be saying no, but some people still yes. Is poker a sport? Is chess a sport? Does sport have to have an athletic component? Although I got to tell you, the longest I've ever spent at the poker table was 12 hours before I got kicked out of a tournament, one shy of the money. That wasn't a lot of fun. It was fun to play all day, but to get knocked out when I would have stood to make a couple $100, if I, made it just a little bit further, or a couple $1,000 if I made it, 3 more hours. I got to tell you, it's a physical ordeal to play poker for 12 hours and still be mentally sharp and make the right decisions. And your back hurts if it's so easy to do this for 12 hours. Okay, you gotta be paying attention to your posture. I mean, there is a physicality to it. Same thing with chess, but I think a lot of people would say it's not enough for it. It's a game. It's not a sport. Okay, pro wrestling, no. I don't think any of us would say that it's a sport. Okay, and we'll go into why, because it's not competitive. It's often decided who wins and who loses. And then stunt jumping. Well, you're competing against a record book. You're not competing against somebody else. So there's often an element missing there. And then bird watching and fishing. They do include these in Sports Illustrated. I'm a bird watcher, but I've always been a little leery of saying it's a sport. It's more a competition when you try to see more bird species than the next person. Fishing, though, is a little bit more likely because it's more popular and, they have these competition, but it's more a competition to see who can haul in the biggest fish. So you need to come up with your 5 criteria. Here are mine. There needs to be competition. That's why pro wrestling is not a sport. A sport must be competitive and outcome driven. There needs to be real, true outcomes. More than just winners and losers. Sometimes it's who wins what exactly. There needs to be structure to the competition. Okay, and here we see winners on the left, Tom Brady, and we see probably the single most famous 20th century football photograph, if not photograph in sports, and it's from a loser. This is Y.A. Tittle. He's just been sacked for the second time in 2 plays, thrown to the ground. He's bloody. They've lost the game, but it's about the struggle it's the agony of defeat. It's about the struggle in football. It's about competition, and you don't always win. That's why we watch it. If your team won all the time, it would reduce the excitement that you feel when they do win. It needs to have structure. It needs to have organization. It must have rules, codified rules that everyone can see and have access to and understand. It needs to have a method of enforcing those rules, usually through officiating. It needs to have an organized league above the officials to make sure there's no corruption, to continually tweak the rules, in the best interest of the game, to codify the rules, interpret them, and to engage in other aspects of design. That's very necessary at the same time. Okay, so you need to have organization. You need to have skill sets. You need to have recognizable skill sets, physical, mental, or psychological, often more than one, sometimes all three, that can be honed by practice. And that can set apart those who are the legends from those who are the superstars, and then from the stars to the mediocre players to those who really are lucky to be here and very quickly on their way out. This is the one that I think that is, because I'm a historian, ends up on here. Memory. A sport must have a dedicated fan base that understand its history, must have celebrities noted for their skill or success, and enjoy a certain level of standing in the community, even if that standing is rooted in hyperbole or myth. So in essence, what I'm saying here is it needs to have a large enough footprint, both in its popularity, but also it needs to extend back far enough in time that there's this kind of cultural memory, that there's people that we look up to in the past that no longer play it. It's got to have been around for a little bit, and it needs to be it needs to be to a certain size. Okay, I call that memory. And here we see Arsenal on the left. The red and white are their colors for this British soccer club. Okay, and then we have Jackie Robinson, breaking the color barrier in baseball. Okay, it needs to have a certain sort of connection with fans that transcends time and space into the past, and large enough that it creates a kind of imagined community. I mean, when I see people, strangers, and I see them wearing a Dodger hat, I like them a little bit more. This guy's okay. I mean, if they're wearing a Yankees hat, they're a jackass. Sorry for the language. I mean, they're clearly evil. They're wearing a Yankees hat. Okay. What's wrong with them? They're living in Southern California. It's probably the same way Laker fans feel when they see me wearing my Celtic. Oh, there goes that idiot wearing the Celtic garb. There's this kind of, sports move from being a game or a competition to sport when that kind of community gets big enough and starts having some sort of collective identity. Okay. And then there needs to be a level of appeal that is either on the aesthetic, emotional, personal, or political dimension, such as, Game 7 overtime goal from Bobby Orr, who then sort of leaps. And, if you see video footage of it, it doesn't look that impressive. They got him at just the right moment. It looks like he's flying through the air after he wins the Stanley Cup. Or it could be political, such as the John Carlos and Tommy Smith, the Fists of Glory, the Black Power salute at the 1968 Olympic Games in Mexico City. It needs to have a certain level of appeal. So competition, organization, skill sets, memory, appeal. I'm going to want you to come up with your own by the end of the quarter. So 3 additional considerations, 3 questions to keep in mind. Is it a sport if there's no appreciable athletic component? Is tiddlywinks a sport? Would poker be a sport? Is 21 a sport? You play one hand and that's it? Probably not. Is sitting in an area in one place for 12 hours and keeping up proper nutrition? Poker players talk about it, how one reason they win is they have to work out and they have to eat healthy and stuff like that. Where do you draw the line there? Is it a sport if it is largely recreational in nature, such as Over the Line, which is contested every summer in San Diego? It's kind of a fun carnival feel, but it's more for fun. Okay, it's more recreational. Is it a sport if it can be contested while holding a drink in one hand? That goes back to poker, but also probably dodgeball. You could probably hold a Coke and run up and kick the ball. You couldn't kick it very hard. So these are some additional considerations that other people have asked me in the past, which I think are fair game as you come up with your own criteria for what constitutes a sport. And that is the lecture for week 1.